if we need to.
Yes.
Okay, with that, it's 6 o'clock and we'll go ahead and get started. 6 o'clock on May 13th, I'd like to welcome everyone to our meeting to the City of Georgetown Historic and Architectural Review Commission. At this time, Myrna, will you please take a roll of attendance for us?
Yes, good evening. Carolee Nunn.
Here.
Michael Walton. Faustine Curry.
Here.
Steve Johnston. Terry Hyde.
Here.
Catherine Morales. Pam Mitchell.
Here.
And Robert McCabe will not be participating tonight. And I do see that Michael is logged on.
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry, it was in transition when you called my name.
Very good. So Myrna, you have Michael and you have Steve. I don't know if Steve was able to unmute or not.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you all for being here. Welcome to the regularly scheduled Historic and Architectural Review Commission meeting. Commission members are appointed by the Mayor and City Council. The commission is responsible for hearing and taking final action on applications for certificates of appropriateness based upon the City Council adopted downtown and old town design guidelines and the Unified Development Code. We will be considering the cases before us individually as follows. Staff will make a presentation and then I will give the commissioners an opportunity to ask questions to staff. After the staff presentation, the applicant or their representative will have up to 10 minutes to present their project, followed by questions from the commissioners. Once staff and the applicant have addressed questions from the commissioners, we will open the meeting for a public hearing. If you would like to speak on an agenda item, please wait until the public hearing is open for that item. Please raise your hand when that item is being discussed and staff will call your name when it is your turn. Please clearly state your name and address. Each person that has signed up to speak on the item will have up to 3 minutes. A speaker may allot their time to another speaker for a maximum of 6 minutes total. If a speaker wishes to allot their time to another speaker, please raise your hand and indicate so, along with your name and address, and then also who you will be allotting your time to. Please remember that all comments and questions must be addressed to the commission. After everyone who has signed up has spoken, I will close the public hearing and provide a few minutes of rebuttal time to the applicant if they so choose. After that, I will ask the commissioners for additional questions to the applicant or to staff. Following this set of questions, I will then ask the commissioners for a motion and a second, followed by deliberation, and then the commissioners will vote. If the applicant or a member of the public has questions or concerns following a vote on an agenda item, please communicate those to Myrna so she can follow up with you moving forward from that point. Okay, now before we move into our regular agenda, I wanted to give just a few minutes to our new councilwoman, Amanda, to visit with us just a little bit. Amanda?
Thank you all very much. I just want to take a few minutes. I know that you have a very busy agenda tonight, but because this transition is quick and fast, I wanted to take a moment to just say to you all how appreciative I am of the service that you all give to Harc and how much I've enjoyed working with each one of you over the last 15 months as we've done this virtually together, and then our time together on the dais. I'm sad that I haven't been able to see you all in person, but hopefully we will see each other at different times. But I just wanted to express my gratitude to each of you for the work that you give to the city. And then, as I said in my swearing in remarks, this was very bittersweet for me to run for city council because it's very hard for me to leave Harc. I love being on Harc, and I believe that the work you do is so important. As I said, I want to give a shout out to Sophia and Nat and Britton for being so great to work with over my time at Harc. I'm looking very forward to working with them in this new role on city council. But everybody else in the city staff has hard shoes to fill because I'm now partial to our planning staff. and look very forward to working with them. But I just know that I will always continue to be a champion for Harc on City Council. I believe that our greatest assets are downtown and our historic overlay. And, I have an open door policy, so please reach out to me if you need anything in the future. And I will occasionally probably log on to a Harc meeting just because I'll miss the work, but have other work that I have to move on to, now. But just know that I'm always a big fan of yours, always a champion for you all. And if you need anything, please let me know. And I know that y'all will be in good hands, whatever direction Harc moves in from now with, leadership. And of course, you have great leaders in our city staff. So thank you all so much.
Thank you, Amanda. We're so excited to have a Harc person on City Council.
All right, we all enjoy the meeting, and I'm gonna do something else on my Thursday night.
Okay, well, with that, we will move on right into our agenda. The first item on the agenda is consideration and possible action to approve the minutes from April 22nd, 2021, the regular meeting of the Historical and Architectural Review Commission. Are there any questions or comments from the commissioners? Okay, with that, I would ask for a motion.
I'll move to approve the minutes.
Thank you, Terry. Who seconded? I'm sorry.
This
I
is
will.
Carol Lee. I'll second.
Okay,
So-
thank you, Carrie Lee. Sorry, I thought I heard a random echo.
Yeah.
Thanks to Zoom
I did
meeting.
too.
Okay, Terry, at first, a motion by Terry, second by Carrie Lee. Myrna, will you please call the roll?
Yes, and I just wanted to clarify, since we do have a quorum now with Michael logged on, we do have a quorum, so Pam, we won't be having you on the dais this evening.
What we did a couple meetings ago that said if we don't have all 7 of us, we'd have an alternate fill in anyway, is not in effect yet. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's not in effect yet.
Okay, all right. That's all right. That makes sense. I just wasn't sure. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Pam, for being here. Okay, Myrna,
Carolina.
you're ready.
Carolina,
Yes.
Michael Walton,
Yes.
Faustine Curry,
Yes.
Steve Johnston,
Yes.
Terry Hyde.
Yes.
So that passes 5-0.
Okay, thank you, Myrna. With that, we'll move on to agenda item D, updates, commissioner questions, and comments. Sophia, I'll turn that over to you.
Thank you. Just 2 updates, one of which is the bylaws that we were just talking about right now. I took the item to the city council at their last meeting this week, and they did authorize me to proceed forward with those changes. So we do anticipate, we do need 2 readings to approve those. And so the city council is very supportive of the move. So we're going to start working on those. We do have notice procedures and 2 readings to go through, but I'm really happy that they were supportive of that change. So we'll work on that. The second thing we found out was that starting in July, we'll start meeting in person, and we'll be able to have public input via Zoom or telephone. We'll figure that out. It'll be a new change for us to be in the council chambers and to have that going. But just wanted to let you know that in July, we will start making that change. So you still have all of June and your next meeting on Zoom. We just need a little lead time on notices to send people to the right spot and to get ourselves organized on procedure. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. I have to say, it'll be nice to see all of your faces in person. Even if we're spread out, it will be such a good thing. So I'll look forward to July. Okay, with that, we'll move right on to agenda item E, public hearing and possible action on a request for a certificate of appropriateness for new signage. And Britton, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Chair. Britton Bostick, the Downtown and Historic Planner,
And we have 3 cases tonight, commissioners. One of those is a conceptual review, but we'll start with the City Post Chop House signage. This is that public hearing and possible action on a request for a certificate of appropriateness for new signage that is inconsistent with an approved master sign plan or applicable guidelines at the property located at 113 East 8th Street, bearing the legal description lots 5 and 8, block 40, City of Georgetown. And so what y'all are considering tonight is new signage that is a little bit different from what our design guidelines prescribe. And so commissioners, if signs clearly meet the design guidelines, those are able to be approved administratively by staff. But anything that is different from what is pretty carefully described in the design guidelines is something that we carry forward to y'all for consideration. And so I'd like to start with an overview of the signage proposed for the building. This is the old Federal Post Office building. If you missed the Tuesday talks that Ann Evans and I did on Tuesday, we talked about the history of this building. It was constructed, finished in 1931. It was part of the Works Progress Administration work that was done during the Great Depression. It was so architecturally beautiful and significant that the Williamson County Courthouse National Register Historic District was expanded in the 1980s specifically to include this building. It celebrated its 50th birthday by getting included in the National Register of Historic Places and being deemed eligible for inclusion. And then we're celebrating its 90th birthday this year. And it's getting a new business. And so the signage that you see here is mostly what is able to be approved by staff, where you have the signage sharing steaks, oysters, wine, fine spirits, the City Post kind of up there on the, just below the lintel, the part over the door. You've got some signage on the window. That's all stuff that staff is able to approve. There is some existing signage on the property from when it was the City Hall. So if you've been in Georgetown for a long time, this was City Hall after the post office left in 1988. And then not too long ago, the city sold this property. It's now in private ownership, but a couple of those sign pieces remain on the property. And so this is just to about a block to the east of the courthouse. They're on 8th Street and Church Street. It's a high priority structure. The state of Texas does hold an easement on this property, and that's not the way that this easement works is not something that we generally review for, but during the process, the property owner has met the state's requirements for that easement. It also includes parts of the building interior. And so if you go into the front foyer, you'll see that it has a lot of those original characteristics. And so the sign that's being proposed that was not able to be approved by staff and is here for your consideration is a monument sign. So a sign that's basically mounted to the ground, not to the building facade. It's proposing to use the existing brick and concrete base. I'll show a photo in a minute of what that looks like right now, but it's proposing to use that same base, remove the City Hall sign, which no longer applies, and replace it with an acrylic sign. So this is a translucent cabinet that would allow light to shine through the sides, with the exception of where you see the black or the dark color that's imagined similar to a postage stamp design, that would be opaque. So the black part and the yellow or gold colored part, that would be opaque. And the sign would be illuminated where it says City Post, where it has the kind of cancellation mark striping, and then in that white area kind of around the chop house letters. The back of the sign is proposed to have changeable copy. So those individual letters that you can slide in and out to change the message, that's not something that would be facing the public right of way. It would be something that would be facing the businesses, customers, and visible just through a window. So that's not something we anticipate being visible from the public right of way. Oops. So when illuminated, the sign would essentially glow through the sides and then kind of in a frame around the postage stamp. From what I understand, there are small holes in that black acrylic that would allow light to come through those holes. So a little bit of a starry sky effect, if I could describe it that way. The sign illumination has been proposed to be LED inside that cabinet, so you wouldn't see the LED light fixtures themselves. They'd be embedded. There's a lot of technical information that goes into what the applicants provided and what they're proposing, but essentially it would be a smooth white cabinet that would be able to glow with light from fully within. They'd have an access panel on the back of it to be able to do any maintenance or replacement that they would need to do. And then the applicant has proposed to have LED lights that would provide for a multiple color scheme. They're not proposing to have the colors rotate for the sign, so not proposing to have a rainbow of colors rotating, rather to have the flexibility to be able to have different single colors. For example, the sign would normally be illuminated with a white light, but could be illuminated with a red light for Valentine's Day, could be illuminated with a green light for St. Patrick's Day, maybe a blue light for the 4th of July, etc. And so you can see some of the color options that the applicant is proposing to be able to deploy. Again, the intent was not to be able to rotate through the color scheme and have the light changing, but rather be able to put it on a setting of different colors depending on events or holidays that were occurring that might be related to the business or their desire to celebrate those holidays. This is where the sign is presently located. It's to the front of the building. This is not part of the original post office complex. This was something that was installed after it became the city hall. So we're right across from 600 degrees in this photo, and it's very close there to the sidewalk. But you can see, because it is a monument sign, it's not attached to the building facade and mounted to the ground. It doesn't have high visibility over vehicles, but would be to the front. So now we're getting a closer look. You can see they did post their notifications. So what the design is proposed to do with the height is to be able to be the same height as this existing kind of billboard sign that you see to the right. They'd like for those heights to match. So that's the 5'8" total height that you're seeing proposed. But the sign that's being constructed would replace this sign that shows 113 East 8th Street. That looks like a concrete block that has kind of engraving in it for the letters. So that would be removed, and then this would be set right on top of that pedestal. And the proportions of the logo kind of matching the proportions of the business branding to fit the width of that existing kind of pedestal or base would cause the sign in total from the ground to be 5 feet 8 inches tall. Although the part they're constructing would be less than that. The base is currently about 21 inches tall. And so when staff reviewed the application for this sign in particular, like I said, the other signs proposed complied with the design guidelines. We found it complied with some of the criteria, but mostly partially complied. And so the reason for that, commissioners, is because of the multiple color options for the sign illumination that were proposed. If that were not part of the proposal, staff would have had many more of these as it complies. And so that's kind of the key thing that we did not find sufficient support in the design guidelines, and also did not find that having the multiple color options available would be consistent with the design guidelines and the character of the downtown overlay district. 2 signs were posted on the site. Staff has not received any comments on this item. And so staff's recommendation, given the design of the sign and where it's proposed to be located, which is using an existing location, also the type of illumination that's been proposed with this sign, staff is recommending approval of the request for the monument sign with the condition that the internal illumination be warm white light only and not the multiple colors. And so that concludes my presentation, commissioners. As usual, you have options to approve as presented by the applicant, to deny as presented by the applicant, to approve with conditions. And if there are conditions, we ask that you make that clear in your motion. And then there's also the option to postpone. If you do find a need to postpone, staff would just ask that you identify the information you would need for us to bring back to a following meeting for your decision. And so the applicant is in the meeting with us. This is a public hearing. And so when you're ready, Chair, we will open the public hearing, and I have a slide for that.
Great, thank you so much, Britton. Applicant, if you would be interested, we'd love to hear if you have any other things to tell us or share with us about your project.
I'm a little new to this. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think Britton did a really great job in articulating what we are intending. Just one quick note on the colors. It's not our intention to do this very often, but we thought it'd be really neat or fun on very special occasions, since the technology is already existent with the LEDs, and we have the ability to change the hue when it makes sense, that it would be a fun thing on very special occasions like St. Patrick's Day, for example, to run the sign as a green, just sort of as a lark on that particular day. But we have no intention of doing these random colors on random or other days, just whenever that would potentially make sense, and even on a very prescribed way. So I hope I didn't want to leave the impression that this was something that we wanted to do routinely, but that because the technology exists, that we would be maybe occasionally wanting to do it if it made sense.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you, Mr. Damon. We appreciate those comments. Okay, before we get started with the commissioners' discussion, Myrna, I think you have something you'd like to share.
Yes, for this item, we do have Michael Walton, one of our commissioners that just needs to recuse for the item. He has filled out the conflict of interest form, so he will not be voting on this item.
Very good. Thank you, Myrna. Okay, with that, commissioners, now is the time for us to ask Britton and Mr. Damon any questions we might
have. I have a question. Britton, is there a slide, I'm sure you had it up already, where the lighting, the colored lighting doesn't comply or only partially complies? Is that the reasoning behind that, or is that just kind of a?
So in the staff, that's a great question. In the staff report, we kind of highlighted that yeah, there are a couple of aspects of the sign that are a little bit different from what we often see in the downtown. And so one of those is we usually, let me think of a good way to say this. When you want to do an internally illuminated sign, really the best option to do that, in most cases, the only option to do that is to use a plastic material for the light to be able to shine through, or at least glow through, if you will, kind of a transparent plastic material. And that comes in different colors depending on the effect that's desired. What we usually require is that a full sign panel not be illuminated. In this instance, and I'll kind of back up here, in this instance, the full sign panel would not be illuminated. It would be part of the sign panel. We usually, in the design guidelines, we're looking for signs that only the letters are illuminated. And so in this case, the city post letters would be illuminated, but the chop house letters would be kind of surrounded by light. So usually we have brought signs to Harc when it's not just the sign letters themselves that have been illuminated. And then this would be, if you look in the very center of this slide, there's kind of a male figure standing, showing the height of the sign, but it also shows the side. So rather than being a solid or opaque material on the sides, which you often see with an illuminated sign cabinet, you'll be able to, the light will kind of glow through the white acrylic sides of the sign cabinet. And so even though there are a few aspects of the sign that are a little bit outside of what the design guidelines recommend, this is kind of a really, in staff's view, kind of a successful reuse of an existing sign location. It's a way for there not to be a prominent primary sign attached to the building facade. The signage attached to the building facade was much more minimal than the maximum allowed. They stayed well under their size limit for that sign amount. And so this is kind of a way to balance showing the business location and identifying that with not being too disruptive to either the building or the existing site. But we do not have a color changing illumination either through lighting itself or through sign illumination. That's something that our design guidelines don't really support. The illumination for signs has traditionally been and has kind of continued to be this warm white light. Even in applications where a halo lighting style or other more modern illumination style has been proposed, those lights have been a white light rather than a colored light or a light with the ability to change color. And so on that basis, and given that there's not a lot of very modern buildings surrounding this particular property that might lend themselves to that kind of color opportunity, staff's evaluation on the whole was that this was a successful sign for the site. It was really well designed, but that the multiple colors were not consistent with the character of this structure and surrounding structures. And so for that reason, we're recommending approval of the sign, but with white light rather than with the other color options that could be used with that LED technology.
Okay, thank you. That makes sense.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Terry. What other questions do we have for Britton on this or for the applicant? Okay, Britton, I just have a few questions. I think you answered this in your comments, but my understanding is there aren't any other examples in downtown of colored lighting like this. Is that correct?
Not like this that I can recall. And if someone knows different, happy to hear that. The only sign that I can think of that has a color illumination that's very prominent is the El Monumento sign. Has a halo lighting effect in the color red. The signage that's been approved, at least for the last while, I'm only recalling white lights, even though the acrylic color might be different. So not all of the acrylic faces that the light shines through, those are not all white. Those are sometimes different colors, but the light source itself has tended to be a white light source.
Okay, very, very good. And then if we were to approve the colored lighting, say to only allow it on holidays, is there even a way that we could enforce that or make sure that happened? I'm sure they would follow that to the T, but how would we enforce that if we were to adjust that some?
From an enforcement standpoint, that would probably go through our code compliance department, and that would be a little more challenging to implement. Not suggesting that the applicant would want to do that, just saying from an enforcement standpoint, it's a little more difficult. From a motion standpoint, in terms of making a motion for the item, you could have the opportunity, we have an approval with conditions. And so there could be a condition that the illumination be used one color at a time, or some similar language to indicate that the expectation is that it would only be that one single color and not revolving color or rotating color or any motion with the light source.
Very good. Thank you, Britton.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Any other questions before we open for a public hearing? Great. Okay, at this point, we'll open the public hearing. You'll need to state your name and address if you have any comments. Nat, do we have anyone to speak on this? I just called Nat. I think it's you that I need to reach out, that I need to ask.
Sure. I think Miriam and I are both monitoring the chat and the Q&A. Okay. I don't see anybody with their hand raised from the audience, and I have not received any request to address the commission. I don't believe Myrna has either.
Very good. Well, then we will close the public hearing. And if there are no other questions, then I would request a motion. But if there is more discussion, you're more than welcome to make your comments.
This is Kara Lee, and I make a motion that we accept the sign as presented with the optional colors to be used for specific reasons and one at a time, not in a rotating fashion at the same time.
Britton, is that a specific enough motion for what you need?
I believe it is. Yes, ma'am.
Great. Okay, now I'd like to ask for a second.
I'll second.
Terry, was that you?
Yes, ma'am.
Very good, thank you. Okay, Myrna, I'd like to call for a vote, please.
Caroline Nunn,
Yes.
Faustine Curry,
Yes.
Steve Johnston,
Yes.
Carrie Hyde.
Yes.
So that motion passes 4-0.
Very good. Thank you, Myrna, and thank you, commissioners, for all your comments and for your vote. Okay, with that, we will move to item F, which is a conceptual review of a request for a certificate of appropriateness for a new residential building construction. Britton, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you again, Chair. And so this is, Commissioners, a conceptual review. There is not a public hearing tonight. We did attempt to have a public hearing this evening, but we needed to make an adjustment for the notification to meet all of the requirements. And so what we're going to do tonight is a conceptual review to give feedback to the applicant on what they are proposing. And then we'll have the public hearing in 2 weeks at your meeting on May 27th, and notifications have gone out for that. So keep in mind that there's not a public hearing with this item, but this is something that we're presenting kind of as a complete application and with a few questions that we'll be asking. And so this is a conceptual review of a request for a certificate of appropriateness for new residential building construction and a 5-foot 0-inch building height modification to the required 20-foot building height at a distance 3 feet from the side street setback to allow the building to be 25 feet at a distance 3 feet from the side street setback at the property located at 701 South College Street, bearing the legal description of Block C Clamps Addition. And so a couple of pieces to this request, Harc. This is residential infill construction, and it includes attaching to the existing non-historic accessory structure. And then there are some changes proposed to that existing non-historic accessory structure that would actually be staff review. The reason that we're presenting the project as a whole is because we want the commissioners to see the intended final product, because that's what you would be reviewing and considering in your next meeting and the public hearing. And so this is the front facade of the proposed new house. 2 stories, has a lot of traditional building characteristics, but there's a little bit of history to the site, and some of the commissioners will remember this from last summer. This is a property located at the intersection of East 7th Street and South College Streets. Showing the aerial here, it's a low priority structure on a very large lot. This lot has been intact since it was platted in the 1800s and comes with a pretty interesting story. Christian Augustus Daniel Clamp, I think was a builder in Georgetown. He had a business on the east side of the square. The buildings are no longer there. They've since been replaced, but not only was he a builder, a carpenter, and very skilled, he was a real estate developer. And so he has his own addition to the city of Georgetown, and we see Block C there on the slide. This was platted in 1880. And from the demolition request that Harc approved last summer, this existing house was constructed around 1883 at a clear date. It was a little bit difficult to nail down, but it looks like 1882, 1883, and we first see it in the 1916 map. So by 1925, a lot of other properties had developed around it, but you still see pretty large lawns, large properties. There were a couple of accessory structures. At some point in time, there may or may not have been another house on the lot, but it didn't last very long. We can see this house at the very back of a photo from 1886 that was taken from the Williamson County Courthouse. And so it's really interesting to see this house kind of through time. It's very blurry, it's so hard to make out, but that's the right location, and it looks like it had a pretty big fence around it. We see it a little bit better in 1934 photo from Southwestern University's Special Collections. And so that property was kind of the whole length of the red highlight that you see there. By the 1960s, a lot of the structures had been removed from the site, leaving just the main house. And then 1974, still there. So the accessory structure that I'll show here in a minute was not constructed, it looks like, until the 1980s. Did not exist before that. In 1984, a pretty substantial remodel was undertaken for this house. We have some documentation and records in the Preservation Georgetown collection. That's been at the library. It's currently being digitized at Southwestern University, but during the historic resource survey that was undertaken in 1984, this house was kind of mid-remodel, and it was captured in a couple of, excuse me, photos, and it was also captured in some documentation of that property. Unfortunately, a lot of the historic material was removed. And so the siding, the windows, the columns, a lot of the historic fabric had been removed. The historic form remained. And so we can still see what appears to be the original shape of the house, but there was also a 2-story addition constructed. And so you can see the house here today, non-historic materials on the exterior with the exception of the chimney, which looks to be the original chimney, but a lot of the materials used in that 1984 remodel were not very high in quality, and there has been a lot of deterioration over time. And so last summer in July, the commissioners approved a demolition of the existing historic structure for loss of significance. And because, as we relayed at the time and the applicant had worked through, there was not a lot of historic fabric remaining or that would be able to be salvaged into a new structure. That had not been the original plan of the property owner, but there were going to be a lot of difficulties, and most of the remaining historic fabric, if not all, was going to need to be fully replaced. And so the option that was selected for the request was demolition, and that was approved accordingly. So the applicant has not moved forward with the demo yet. The house is still standing today. They have been working on the design of the new structure and are bringing that forward to you today. So what they're proposing is to construct a new 2-story home in the same location as the 1-story home is. And then the second structure you see to the bottom of this site plan drawing, that's kind of a carport structure that they're proposing to finish out and redo the exterior to match this house. And then ultimately, to meet our UDC requirements, our Unified Development Code, they would connect the 2 structures via a breezeway that I'll show with the elevations. And so when staff reviewed the information, the technical details, this is on such a large lot that they have plenty of space for the square footage. They meet impervious cover requirements. They meet floor to area ratio requirements, even with the existing structure. The applicant has proposed, these should be floor plans. Showing the floor plans for the first and second floor. The second floor will be a little bit smaller than the first floor and also have some porches. So there are a lot of porches and traditional features planned. Gable roofs, some porches with rails and columns, some single hung windows, and kind of other features. A chimney proposed to be stuccoed, similar to some that we've seen in the Old Town overlay and kind of similar to what this existing house has had. This is showing the rear elevation that's facing to the east. And then the left elevation is what you would be able to see from East 7th Street. So showing that side. This is the elevation showing how they are proposing to connect to the existing accessory structure. That structure is still in condition good enough to be able to be used as a living space. And so they're proposing to enclose the carport and match the appearance much more closely to the requested 2-story structure. So because that accessory structure is not historic, our UDC allows proposed changes to the exterior to be approved at the administrative level, as long as they meet the zoning requirements. And so, but knowing that this was anticipated to be connected, it's part of Harc's review to see the full finished picture. And so that's what we wanted to show. So this is the College Street elevation, what you would be seeing from College Street. And then here are some additional elevations showing what the applicant, the property owner, is calling the guest house. So that's showing the College Street elevation. And then that left elevation would really not be visible from East 7th Street. It would mostly be kind of behind the house, but the applicant went ahead and showed what that would look like once they're finished with the proposed changes. Again, to match existing, match exterior materials to the materials that are proposed for the new house. And so here are those materials. The applicant is proposing to use an asphalt shingle roof, similar to what we see in the Old Town overlay, a lapped fiber cement siding. So it has some of those traditional siding characteristics, but it would be that fiber cement product. Also using the windows, a vinyl single hung 1/1 window, kind of a simple design. And then also one of the things the applicant has looked at is they would really like to use a decorative or ornamental metal railing for the porches. And that's part of what we're asking for your feedback today. Usually we see a wood railing on porches, but they're proposing to use the decorative metal in a pattern similar to what y'all are seeing in the photo there. And so showing a little bit of the current context, at least as shown from Google Street View, this is on South College Street, looking north and looking toward the property. You can see the current subject property is the bright blue building. There are surrounding structures of varying ages. So properties in this area range from late 1880s construction to 1940s, 1960s construction in a couple of instances. It is a large lot, and some of the properties surrounding do have large lots also, but properties directly to the south tend to have smaller lots. These are properties with pretty generous setbacks. Buildings tend to be set back pretty far from the street edge and from the property line. So you can see across the street to the north is a house of the late 1880s, or I think 1890s time period, and some pretty generous lawn space. And so when staff reviewed the application, we found that it complied or partially complied with the approval criteria. And where you see partially complies, commissioners, that's because there is a building height modification requested with this. So that would be part of what the applicant would be asking Harc for. We have separate building height modification approval criteria. And so in one case that complied, that was views to and from the courthouse and to and from the Town Square Historic District will be protected. This property is not expected to have any impact on the courthouse view or a view to the downtown because it's located far enough away that there's no impact anticipated. 3 of the criteria just didn't apply because they're specific to the downtown. But one of the criteria staff found did not comply with that request, and it's the relationship of the proposed project to the existing structures in the immediate vicinity remains consistent. The reason that staff noted this as it does not comply is because the house is proposed to be in the same location as the existing house. So that relationship would be consistent. However, there are a lot of one-story properties surrounding this property, not all, but a lot of one-story properties. And to go from a one-story structure to a 2-story structure, and then even leaving it in the same place, staff found that that was going to change the relationship to the street to an extent that the building height modification was not kind of necessary. The house is able to be shifted over so that that height modification wouldn't be necessary. And so that's why staff found that it did not comply. Other opportunities and options remain available. And because the house is going from a previously 1-story house to a 2-story house, part of the requirement for a setback for those taller structures is to kind of minimize the appearance from the street and give more space around them. Since other surrounding properties have that more space around them, particularly from the East 7th Street side, staff found that in that case, it did not comply. Again, this is a conceptual review. And so this is where we are looking for feedback from the commissioners on what's being proposed. And we have 4 specific questions that I'd like to ask before the commissioners give their feedback. This is non-binding feedback. This is feedback that the applicant is able to take and consider. They have the opportunity to make adjustments to their application materials and provide those back to staff so that we can bring those to y'all in the next meeting, or they are also able to keep the application materials as is and come forward to that public hearing at the next meeting. And so the questions that we're asking the commissioners are, does the requested building height modification meet the criteria for approval? Is the breezeway connection to the existing non-historic accessory structure compatible with the Old Town Overlay District? And are the proposed decorative metal porch railings compatible with the architectural style? Given that you were able to see the application materials in their entirety, staff also wanted to check and see, is any additional information needed for a decision? i.e., is there additional information that the commissioners would like for the applicant or staff to provide at the next meeting for making a decision? And so commissioners, that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions. The applicant is also here in our meeting and is available to answer questions. We are happy to take the questions one at a time, Madam Chair, if you would like to go through those one at a time and get the commissioners' feedback, or if there is other feedback or questions that the commissioners have, we would also be glad to respond to that.
Thank you so much, Britton, and applicants, thank you so much for being here. I think, Britton, thanks for the suggestion. I think we'll go through the questions one at a time. So the first, does the requested building height modification meet the criteria for approval? Commissioners, let's discuss that. And if you have questions for the applicants, let's talk with them as well.
So, Britton, this is Michael. I have some questions, but I'm not sure I can answer yours yet without asking mine first. Is that okay?
Yes, absolutely.
But of course you could, of course.
Okay, so when I look at the materials, so I'm scrolling through it. The partially complies item number 2, compliance with any design standards of the code. Is that referring to this height thing?
That is. And so if the proposed project meets all of the UDC requirements, then we mark that as complies. If there are any building height, setback, or floor to area ratio modifications required, we either mark that as a partially complies or as a does not comply. There's only one UDC requirement that staff has found in their evaluation that didn't comply. It complies otherwise. And so that's why we had partially complies. It's because there would need to be a building height modification.
Okay, so then question 2, looking at this diagram that's on the screen now, which of those points to the left is the one that's too high?
Thank you for taking my prompt for that. And so if you'll look at this elevation, commissioners, this is what you're seeing from South College Street. East 7th Street will go past you on the left. And so there is a height limit at the setback in Old Town. So at the property setback, in this case, it's 15 feet from the property line that runs along East 7th Street. There's a building height limit of 15 feet. And so if you look at the way this house is constructed, you see this 1-story portion on the far left, and then the house shifts to a 2-story portion. And I can certainly kind of draw this in for the commissioners in the next presentation, but the height of that eave, that you can see it's 31 feet, 10 inches total to the top of that ridge. We have that 1-story portion, then you see the front door and there's a window above that front door. If you look at the eave height just up and to the left of that 2nd floor window above the front door, that just slightly exceeds the building height limit, because in Old Town, you can come up 15 feet and then you have to come in 3 feet, up 5 feet, in 3 feet. So there's kind of this stair step or almost like layer cake effect that our zoning code creates. And so anything that is not within that layer cake shape requires a building height modification. So kind of that corner of the house that you see and along that eave line would be a little bit taller, a little too close to the street, according to our zoning code and the building height limit specifically for Old Town. And so it's only that side of the house. It's not the other sides of the house. I believe they're kind of set back sufficiently.
So what is a little bit too tall and a little bit too close?
So and this is where, this is kind of good feedback, because now I know I need to draw that illustration in. So if the house were moved further to the south, it would not kind of be in this stepped area that our zoning code creates. So at the setback, you are allowed up to 15 feet in height. And then for every 3 feet you move away from the property line, you're allowed to increase the height another 5 feet. So this exceeds that height limit by being too close to the property line to kind of fit within that stair step of building form that's created.
Yeah, understood. I mean, if they were to shift the house to the right 3 feet, then we're fine.
Essentially, yes, sir.
Okay, so that's my answer to your first question. Let me get back to the questions. I mean, I'd be curious to find out why it couldn't be shifted over 3 feet. If that makes it in compliance. I'm very familiar with the house in the corner, so maybe the applicant, if they are on, can answer that, or just seems that's a simple answer to that question. Shift it over 3 feet and you're done.
My understanding is they would like to keep it in the same location as the initial house, but I believe they are in the meeting and would probably be better suited to answering that.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes. Yes, thank you.
Yes, you can hear me?
Yes, we can.
I lost the internet right as y'all were talking, so I'm only on my phone at this.
Were you able to hear the question, Pam? I think you're muted again.
Britton, can you tell us what the foundation is of the current structure? You're on mute now.
All kinds of magic in Zoom. So the current foundation on the existing house is a wood foundation that is set on top of rocks and partially on top of the ground. It's constructed like a pier and beam, but the piers are really rocks and the beams are pretty short. So oftentimes a pier and beam house would be set 1 foot, 18 inches up to 3 feet off the ground. In this case, it's about 6 inches off the ground. So the house that's being proposed, if I can move backwards again, would actually have that more of that traditional height. It's proposed to be a concrete foundation, but it would have more of that pier and beam height and appearance, even though they're proposing to use a concrete slab.
So the possible answer to the question is they want to use the existing slab is not accurate here. So
no, there's no existing slab. There might be kind of a bit of deteriorated wood dust left when this is complete.
Okay.
Pam,
I think she's back.
Applicant Pam, are you able to hear us now?
Sudden link.
Yes. Okay, well, Pam, when you're able to jump back on, we'll come right back to you. Commissioners, what other questions do we have or thoughts about Britton's questions?
I have a question. I know this isn't really our purview, but are the trees going to remain? Do you know? I think there's some pretty big, amazing looking trees that either in a picture I saw that you presented or on Google Earth.
So there's not going to be a lot of change to the footprint on the site. And I believe it's already open space in the area that the Breezeway is proposed to be constructed between that existing carport and where the house is now, where the house will be. So I'm not sure that there are a couple of hackberries on the property. I believe one is growing very close to the existing house, so that might need to be taken down. We can do some additional research and come back to the commissioners with information about trees if that would be helpful.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. If it's okay, I would like to address the questions when y'all couldn't hear me for some reason.
Yes, no, that'd be great. I think the first question we had was about the location of the house, if it was possible just to shift it 5 feet so it becomes in compliance, or if there was a reason you wanted to keep the house where it currently, the footprint it's currently in.
Okay, it is possible to move it over. That's an option for us. The reason we wanted to first try, well, we have several reasons. One is the design, well, it would be in the place of the current house. That's kind of nice. Two, what we've found from living here for 2 years is that there's this natural courtyard that's formed between the accessory structure and the main house. And we kind of live in that space. And so to enclose that a little bit more, we thought, oh man, this is what has actually become so special to us, especially because the house is so bad right now. We just can't get outside enough. And so that's just been a special place to us. The other thing is the new house has a balcony designed right there. And the closer we move it to the accessory structure, the more it will be the view of the roof. So I was kind of thinking about that. And then the last reason I thought it would be nice is because I really don't know what's going to happen with, because it's a large lot, what's going to happen with the back half of this property. And are we going to keep it all as one? Are we going to at some point want to divide it in two? And if we did divide it in two, the space in between the accessory structure and the main house would pretty much be the backyard, which we would want that to be as big as possible because it really wouldn't have much space behind it. So between all those reasons, I thought, hey, I'll ask. I am okay moving it over, but we also did certainly have reasons for thinking it would, it would be nice if it could stay there.
Thank you for answering that. Michael, did that answer your question?
Yeah, and just for clarity, I think we established that it was 3 feet. And just for ease of processing, if we can shift it to the right 3 feet, I think you would preserve a good portion of what you're talking about and just be able to remove this partially complies item from the list.
Britton, can you confirm that it would be 3 feet that needs to be removed? Needs to be moved.
I will double check that, but I think it is about 3 feet.
Okay. Okay.
The other question that came up while we were kind of in Zoom craziness is about the trees. What are your plans for all of the couple of big trees that are on the lot?
Well, any tree we can save, we will likely save them. I have had 2 different people come out and look at them, and they've both told me that they're not significant. They're kind of junk trees. In fact, in order to even get insurance, which we couldn't even get this place fully insured, but part of what was necessary just to get remodelers insurance, which is all this place would qualify for, is we had to cut down maybe 4 trees because they were in danger of falling on the place. And so there is a pecan tree out front. We can definitely save that. It's not close and it's a good tree, even though it's kind of dying. But the other trees, they're big, but I don't think they have significant value. I still want to save them for the shade and because I like trees, but if they were really in the way, it's not like I'm opposed to planting something better.
Thank you. Thank you for answering that.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have any other questions or comments about the building height modification question that Britton proposed?
I guess it might be helpful to know how it would compare to the height of the historic 2-story structure that's across the street. It looks like, not sure exactly where that is. Let's see.
The one that's very close to the street. I think it's green currently.
Yeah, it looks, and it is really close to the street. It looks like it's probably doesn't have as wide of a setback as the others.
No, that was constructed around 1940 and it is very close to the street. we can come back with a little bit more information. I can add some photos to the presentation and kind of show that relationship better, kind of from that other perspective.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you all. Let's move to the next question. Is the Breezeway connection to the existing non-historic accessory structure compatible with the Old Town Overlay District? So we've approved and not approved a number of breezeways, it feels like, in the last year. So what are your thoughts on that? What are your questions? Anything for the applicant?
So Faustine, it's Michael again.
Thank you, Michael.
I have a question, but it's really about the next bullet. But it's related to the one you're asking about.
Thank you.
You know, just instinctively, I have no concern with the breezeway, but I'm curious about the railings. I don't know who's controlling the slides, but Britton or whoever, if you can go back to the one we were just looking at with the drawing.
And that question is, are the metal railings, do they match the design guidelines for the district?
Yeah, so I'm sort of mixing these together. So the railings that I'm seeing here on this picture, so there's one, whoop, no, go back. So there's the front porch, there's the balcony, and then there's the railing throughout the breezeway. So what we see here, is that representative of what would be there, basically straight bars? Or would it be something a bit more ornate, like the ones in the other slide with the pictures?
What's shown in the elevation is actually if we go with the wood option. If we go with railing, which is our first choice, yes, it would be more ornate, something like that other slide was showing some different options. And I just haven't narrowed it down yet because one, prices change every day and I can't even really get prices at this point. But two, I want to think about it. I kind of want to see how it's looking before I pick exactly which one. But yeah, my first choice is to do metal railings, and it would be kind of everywhere visible that I would do that if I did that. My second choice, if I can't afford that, would be to go with the standard wood option, which is what you're looking at. It would look like that. And then there's also the option to just not have railings everywhere, just some of it to be open. And part of that, again, is what are we going to do with the back half? Is this going to be a backyard and I want more privacy, or is there going to be another backyard portion and I'll have some kind of fence there? So some of it, I kind of just want like approval for all the different options if possible. And then once I get a little further down the road, we can make that choice.
Okay, so Faustine and Britton, the way I'm combining these, if you go back to the questions, the breezeway itself, I think it's fine for Old Town, but looks like it's 30, maybe 40 feet wide, and with that much ornamental railing, I'm not sure that it would be. I think the ornamental stuff on the balcony and maybe the front porch, yes, but across 40 feet, maybe not. But it's really, I'm really trying to respond to the way the question is written. So, you know, answering it that way, I think the breezeway in and of itself is fine, but with the ornamental railing versus the straight bars, I think we would need to get some input on that. And just based on my own short experience, I guess, to the applicant, it would be helpful when you come back, I think, to have the final decision. I don't know that we are able to approve anything that's open-ended. So trust me, I understand in the current situation, like materials and contractors and construction is very difficult. So I fully understand your issue. And I know it's hard, but I actually would, the last thing I'll say is if you have the railings like you have them, but they're metal, I think that would be fine. But those are just my opinions, right? Based on the way the questions are written.
Okay, Britton, are you able to put up the slide that shows the different railings? Yes.
I've got it.
The railing, thank you. The railing that's the furthest to the right, it's more simple. It has some decoration at the top and the bottom, but the poles themselves are just straightforward.
Yeah.
Does everyone see that? That's the one I'm kind of leaning towards. If that were to be the choice in the railings, I'm wondering if you'd feel more comfortable. And also, I just want to say, I hear what you're saying about it maybe being too much on the breezeway. If I have it on the other, that's, I don't know either. I'm the kind of person that wants to do part of it and then stand back and look and then decide. And it's very, even with it drawn on paper, it's just not the same as standing in front of it. So I actually have that same struggle.
Yeah, I don't get involved in those struggles personally. But anyway, again, we're asking for, I think this is really all about sort of opinion and answering the questions. So hopefully I'm doing that. I like the breezeway. I think it's fine in and of itself. But thinking of the next question, you know, those ones to the left, I feel like it would just be too much for a 40-foot long, you know, space.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Pam. What other, either with the breezeway or the railings, what other thoughts do commissioners have?
Could you repeat the actual question about the railing?
Of course.
Sorry.
No, it's perfectly fine. Are the proposed decorative metal porch railings compatible with the architectural style of the house?
So I guess my question is, what is the architectural style of the house? Because it's not going to be historic anymore.
Right.
So is it postmodern historic? Is it New
It's almost a
Orleans
modern
French?
Victorian.
Right.
Modern Victorian. Okay, then yeah. Yeah, I'm having trouble wrapping my brain around that one.
So where I think and the question is fairly narrow, but I think in terms of response, y'all certainly have some leeway or some flexibility there. We don't tend to have metal railings in our historic districts.
Right.
It's not that we've never had them on any structure. We just don't tend to have them and on residential structures. And so since this was a different appearance than we often see proposed for infill, we were just wanting to focus on that item. The owner, Pam, had shared with staff that she had been considering different options. And so we thought that that was a good item to bring to the commission's attention, since that was a detail that she had a few different options available to her on.
This is Carol Lee, and I would say that the metal is not appropriate. The breezeway appears to be fine to me, but the metal, any of those metal railings do not appear to be appropriate for a modern Victorian house.
Thank you, Carolyn. And so, Carolee, just to kind of take that out a little further, are you the wood railing is what you really think fits with the home?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And it fits with the home. It fits with the area. Again, there's just not a whole lot of metal, and the metal is traditionally used with a very ornate house, you know, and this is not what that is.
Thank you. Steve, what thoughts do you have on any of the questions? Not to call you out, but since you're here. On either the breezeway or the railing or the height modification of the home.
Did you ask me a question? I'm sorry.
I don't think he heard you, Faustine.
Oh, Steve, it's on either the height modification of the home, the breezeway, or a wood versus metal railing. If you have an opinion about it. If not, that's perfectly fine. I think you're on mute.
Either one would be fine with me as long as they're compatible with the house design.
Thank you very much, Steve. I guess my thoughts are, I think that moving the house over the 3 feet to just do away with that block would be great. I understand the reasons why you may not want to, but I think just to take away that modification request, hands down, would be awesome from my perspective. For the breezeway, I think it's perfectly fine. And then the railings, I would tend to agree the ornate railings, or the metal ornate railing things. What are these called? I guess railings are beautiful, but I haven't seen any of those anywhere around in Old Town. So, Pam, I hope this has been helpful. And Britton, is there anything else we need to cover from your perspective?
Only if the commissioners, and y'all highlighted a couple of things, so I'll need to come back with some additional photos showing the relationship to surrounding structures. But if there are any other things that the commissioners would need to make a decision, as we anticipate bringing this back in the next meeting, staff would just be glad to know if you have any specific requests for that.
I just have one more question, sorry. Are the proposed materials, which are what I saw were vinyl windows, and you mentioned a type of siding for the house, which sounded like some kind of wood composite?
Yes, so the brand name that's often used is Harc siding, and so it's a lap siding with paint. It has an appearance similar to wood, but it's a different product. It's not a wood product, really. That's
typical of new construction in Old Town.
Correct.
And the vinyl windows are as well.
We have seen that before. So I can think of at least 2 fairly recent examples of new construction that have had the vinyl windows proposed and that Harc has approved.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Terry. Okay. Well, if there are not any other questions from the commissioners, Britton, thank you. Pam, thank you so much for being here and for talking with us about this. We really appreciate it. I hope the suggestions have been helpful for when you bring your project back to Harc.
Can I ask one final question, please?
Of course.
As it seems to be the metal isn't really y'all's first choice in railings. How do you feel if I don't have wood either? If it's just open, is that okay with you guys?
Commissioners, what are your thoughts on that?
At
Yes.
the balcony, at the balcony, you would certainly have some code issues, I think. And you may even at the porch, depending upon the height off the ground, the breezeway is probably not an issue.
Thank you.
Yes, I didn't mean the balcony, just the porches and the breezeway.
Thank you, Carolee. Michael says that would be great.
And specifically on the breezeway, yes.
Yeah.
I think the porch would look funny without a rail, given the style of the house. And, clearly the balcony would need something.
Terry, Steve, are you all thoughts on that?
Sounds fine to me. I like the idea.
Okay. Steve, you're good? Steve's great too. Okay, hopefully that gave you a little bit more insight, Pam.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you so much for being here, and we'll see you in a few weeks.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you all so much for all that discussion. That's awesome. I'm sure that was really helpful for her and helpful for us. Okay, so with that, we'll move on to agenda item G, which is an item that we are continuing from the April 8th, 2021 regular meeting. We postponed it at that meeting. It's a public hearing and possible action on a request for a certificate of appropriateness. And Britton, I am going to turn over this multi-bullet point comment item to you.
Thank you so much, Chair. And so this is an item that was postponed, not from the last meeting, but from the meeting before that on April 8th. And so this had several bullet points. So what I am going to do, commissioners, is just say this is 2020-59-COA located at 1202 East 13th Street. And there were multiple items that were requested from the commissioners. And so this is a combination of some additions, some alterations to the porches, setback and building height modifications, a floor to area ratio modification, and some replacement of historic architectural features. It's for the property located on Lot 1, Block 1 of the Coffee Heights addition. And what I would like to do, commissioners, is kind of recap or go back through the presentation that staff delivered and that was capturing what the applicant had proposed at the last meeting, just to make sure everybody remembers what was asked for previously. There have been some changes to what was proposed. And so if you will, Madam Chair, I would like to go through what was initially proposed first and then show what has been changed or altered since that proposal, if that would be okay.
That would be great. Thank you. And before you go into that, I believe Catherine jumped on the meeting, so welcome, Catherine. Okay, thank you so much, Britton.
Yes, ma'am. And so there were several items that were brought before Harc, modifying both the front of the house, a couple of historic architectural features, doors and windows, and then also adding a garage. And so this was what was proposed in the last meeting in which y'all heard this. This is a property that's at the corner of East 13th and Laurel Streets. And so it's a lot that, if you will remember, is about a block away from the Olive Street National Register Historic District. It's just about a block south of University Avenue, so really close to Southwestern University. And it's in an area that has really been a transition point from pre-World War II construction to post-World War II construction. So this was part of the Coffee Heights addition that was platted in 1926. It was a house that was originally identified on the Sanborn map as having a open front porch, not the enclosed room that we see today. There was the two-story garage added toward the back that no longer serves as a garage, but is still on the site. And then we have some photos from 1934 showing that the structure was kind of at the edge of town at that period of time. And so some large grand homes were developing along University Avenue. We can see in the photos here, but this was a little bit smaller house built in that 1920s era. And then you can see the farmland very close behind. So this was originally kind of the edge of Georgetown and obviously very different today. So by 1964, there had been a lot of additional development, but we're starting to see ranch style homes to the east and to the south of this property. And so by 1974, still had a little bit of area left to build out. So the surrounding properties are a combination of older historic structures and much newer historic structures, even newer by a few decades. So really in an area that has quite a mix. It doesn't appear that since that porch was enclosed early on in its history, the house has changed a lot in terms of its facade composition. This is a photo from 1984, very blurry and very dark. I apologize for that, but it is showing that it looks like there haven't been a lot of changes to the house since then. And so here's some current photos showing the property, showing this two-story stone structure set kind of to the back corner of the property. There's a little kind of rear shed addition on the main house. It's mostly wood construction, but has a stone skirting. There was a conceptual review held with Harc on January 14th of this year. And so this is the existing site showing that single-story structure, existing two-story rock siding building in the back corner. And then the applicant has provided some drawings showing what they are proposing. So when they came before Harc in the last meeting, they had a request to expand the front porch, to add on some bathrooms to the rear of the main house, and then to add a two-story garage. And that garage would have had additional living space and then 2 garage slots. So for the front porch, the applicant was proposing to expand it and enlarge it with the style very similar to what's there now, using similar features. It would create an asymmetrical facade, and it would also require a small setback modification due to the position of the house on the site relative to the property lines. So you can see the railing that's proposed and the kind of gable ornamentation. There was also that porch that we talked about having been enclosed. We saw on the Sanborn map it was previously open. The applicant has also shared, it looks to be very clearly an enclosed room. They had proposed to use a screened window product to be able to use that area as a porch again, but a screened porch. We're familiar with mosquitoes and summertime insects in Central Texas, and so they were looking to have more utility out of that screened porch, which would still be in the same location as the existing room. They had also proposed to replace their non-historic front door with a new front door, character similar to the character of the house, that craftsman style, but to enlarge the width of that door opening. It's currently 32 inches wide, and they're requesting a 36-inch wide door to better facilitate moving things in and out, since a 32-inch wide opening is fairly narrow. And so as we go toward the back, the 2-story addition was proposed to connect to the second floor of that existing historic accessory structure via a deck. That deck would require a little bit of a setback modification. It's the rectangle you see there in red. Also proposing to replace a window with the door to facilitate that connection, to make it easier to move between the two buildings and not have to go outside. So the applicant has shared elevations of their existing house, showing it's approximately 18 feet tall to the ridge. And their addition is proposed with the garage door facing the side street, and then a large dormer kind of above that garage door. So the overall building height was a few feet taller than the existing building because of that height and because of its location, which is necessitated by the other buildings on the site, would need a setback modification and approval of 2 building height modifications. So the structure was proposed to be almost 25 feet tall, almost 7 feet taller than the existing structure, but just a foot or so taller than the 2-story structure in that back corner. So here we see some of those elevations with the windows and showing the dormer features, showing the materials, a lapped fiber cement siding, single hung windows, the asphalt shingle roof to match what's existing, and then a craftsman style door. The applicant had also requested Harc approval to remove the windows on the west side that you see highlighted here and replace them with a double door, and then 2 sets of windows that were proposed to be salvaged from that screen front porch. They were proposing to take those windows out and then move them over here. So not put new windows in and not lose their original or old windows, but to reuse them in this application and just kind of change the openings in the wall. And so that's what was proposed last time. The applicant has kind of amended what they are requesting. And so part of the postponement was to give them the opportunity to consider if there were additional ways that their project could comply with the applicable requirements. So what I wanted to share with you, commissioners, is we started out with multiple bullet points on what we call the caption, the listing of all of the things that are requested according to how it's categorized in our Unified Development Code. What I'm showing you here is what the revised caption would be. So 1, 2, 3, 4 of those bullet points would be removed because the applicant has removed them from what they are proposing tonight for Harc's consideration. And the building height modifications would be reduced. One comes down 1.5 feet, the other comes down a little bit more than 1.5 feet, 1 foot 9 inches. And then I think that's about it. So we're removing 4 things, and then the building height modifications would be a reduced dimension that would be requested. So as we go through the summary bullet points, what was amended and what's being requested tonight for approval, they're still proposing the changes for the porches and the expansion of the front porch. Still requesting approval of the garage. And I apologize, commissioners, I should have amended that. So it would be a 1-story garage that would require 1 setback modification and still the 2 building height modifications, although a lesser dimension than previously. And then the replacement of the front door with a wider front door, and then the replacement of 3 windows with a double door and 3 relocated windows. And so the proposed garage addition would be in the same place as previously. The front porch is not proposed to change from what was initially there. The bathroom additions are not proposed to change from what was initially there. And the footprint of the garage is very much the same. But what would change is the height and the appearance. And so rather than go with a 2-car garage with that larger door, they're proposing to reduce that down to a single garage door. And then you see the window there to the side. The height is shorter, and so you can see from the rendering gives you a perspective view. There's less height there to the top of the ridge, and then that dormer feature has been simplified from what it was initially. And so the applicant has a couple of different options that they wanted to share with the commissioners in terms of the design. They are 2 separate designs. So right now I'm showing design A, which is the applicant's primary request for approval. And this is a structure where we've gone down to the ridge height being 22.4 feet in height. Because of that large dormer roof that kind of spans almost the entire width of the structure, it would still need kind of a minor building height modification because we look at height at the eave if that's what's along the setback, but still a smaller structure overall. The roof pitch would still be fairly steep compared to the existing structures, but using those same materials, the lapped fiber cement siding, the asphalt shingle roof. The applicant is showing and clarifying for the commissioners here, they're the 1/1 windows. This would be a vinyl window product, and that's proposed to match the 1/1 windows that are in the existing structure. There was some question about whether they would be the 2/2 or 4/4 windows. There was a little bit of inconsistency in the drawing, so the applicant has wanted to clarify it's the same style of window that is in the existing house. And so here are some additional views showing how the overall height has been reduced from what was initially proposed, and then kind of removing some of those 2nd-story features. It would just be a 1-story structure now, although they would have, and they would be able to have attic space. So in the last proposal, the total building square footage for the site had exceeded the floor to area ratio limit. And in this proposal, they are within that limit because of removing that 2nd floor. Attic spaces, unfinished attic spaces do not count toward that floor to area ratio limit. So there is a 2nd option that the applicant wanted to show to the commissioners, and this is option B. This is an option in which a gable design has been proposed for the street facing part of the garage addition. And it would be proposed to match the existing gable features on the house. So this little detail up at the very top that has the kind of bars horizontal and then angled and vertical. And then the 3 windows up top would be into that unfinished attic space, not to a full 2nd floor. So just a little bit different appearance, a lot of similarities. So height's about the same. It would just be a different overall look and have the windows in the top instead of the dormers, and have the kind of a 90-degree orientation. And so here are the side views of what's being proposed. These would be interior to the site and not very visible from the street. And so same materials being proposed, commissioners, no change to that, just clarifying that the windows would be a single hung 1 pane over 1 pane to match the existing. And one of the things that came up in the last meeting was the issue of the awning over this double door that's being proposed. The applicant at the time had shown an awning that the commissioners did not think was very compatible with the style of the house. So what I do want to share is in our Unified Development Code, there are a few exceptions to what requires approval of a certificate of appropriateness. And awnings and canopies on 1 and 2 family structures, which this is, do not require approval of a certificate of appropriateness. And so that's why it wasn't included in the initial consideration. The applicant, I will say, has modified the awning to match more closely what is there now and kind of their design goals for the property. So this is not included in the required approval, but I did want to show the photo, or the rendering rather, in the top right corner of the slide is showing what they had intended for the design. Very similar roof slope to the existing roof, and then kind of matching that character more closely. And so this is kind of an outline showing where the property is located, where that garage addition would be on the site. and then showing kind of again the surrounding properties. So commissioners, this is really a transition area in which we have a lot of different styles and ages of structures, a lot of different sizes of structures. For this particular property, the Laurel Street facade is pretty prominent. And so this shows the view from East 13th Street. From this view, the garage addition would not be very prominent at all. It would be mostly hidden behind the main facade of the house. And our design guidelines do point to additions being to the rear. So in that case, it does comply with the design guidelines. What is different about this property is it does have kind of a very broad streetscape along Laurel Street. And because the proposed garage addition would be closer to the street than the existing historic structure, and because it would be taller, it wouldn't be prominent from the 13th Street facade view, but it would be prominent from the Laurel Street facade view. And so when staff reviewed the revisions to the proposed project, we kind of looked very carefully at the context, the surrounding structures. There are carports along Laurel Street. There are carports and garages surrounding. They're on the front of buildings. So one of the key characteristics of properties that developed after the 1920s, and especially after World War II, is that they tend to be much more vehicle oriented. So because you have post-World War II development prominent in this area, you have a lot of houses that are very vehicle oriented, and they have the carports and garages and driveways that are associated with that. In this instance, though, staff, when we reviewed the revisions, we did find that the applicant did certainly comply with more of the approval criteria, but we did find also that the building height modifications would still be needed, and that the height of the proposed structure was still very tall in relationship to the existing structure and in relationship to the structures that were kind of along Laurel Street. So not concerned about the 13th Street view, but still concerned about how that would appear and be very prominent. So our design guidelines consider that additions should be placed to the rear of the main facade. And like I said, it does comply there. But they also give guidance that additions should be subordinate to the historic main structure. And we think that this would still be visually very prominent. And so that's the reason behind staff's recommendation and our finding that the project still only partially complies with most of the applicable review criteria. The application was complete and sufficient for a review, and no master sign plan is needed and no signs are being proposed with this project. So as we go to setback modification approval, staff found that the requested setback modifications either complied, weren't applicable, or in one case partially complied. The proposed garage addition would be set closer to the street than other structures along that streetscape generally. Although not solely, there are a couple of carports that are closer, but they are of a smaller scale than what's being proposed. And so staff found for the building height modification approval criteria, because the applicant had reduced the height, we went from does not comply to a partially complies, but still only partially complies. Staff anticipates that the relationship to the structures in the immediate vicinity would not be consistent with what it is now. And so 2 signs were posted for the previous meeting. For the public hearing, 33 letters were mailed. At that time, staff had received 4 comments in favor and 2 opposed. Staff has received 1 additional comment in opposition after the posting of this item in these updated materials. And so we wanted to share that. Y'all should have seen that via email, since that was shared with staff after the posting of this agenda. So given the proposed changes, staff's recommendation is approval of the request of the front porch addition, the 1.6 foot setback encroachment, the replacement of the front door, the change of the facade to the screen front porch, and the replacement of windows with new door and relocated windows on the west facade. So most of the changes proposed to the front of actually all of the changes proposed to the front of the house, staff is recommending approval because we find that they comply with sufficiently with the approval criteria, and also they will be consistent with the character not only of the existing house, but with surrounding properties. However, staff is recommending denial of the garage addition, the 18-foot 5-inch setback encroachment, the 1-foot 0-inch building height modification, and the 1-foot 3-inch building height modification. And the reason for that, again, commissioners, is the applicant certainly did work to reduce the height and kind of reduce the massing on the site. Staff evaluation is still that that addition will be very prominent on the site and also on the Laurel Street kind of view as one moves down that street, either up or down. And so for that reason, staff is recommending denial. And so commissioners, as we move forward to your motion, you have three options with this particular instance: to approve as presented by the applicant, to deny as presented by the applicant, or to approve with conditions. You don't have the option to postpone because we do need to make a decision in tonight's meeting. And so, Madam Chair, that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer questions, and the applicant has also joined our meeting and is available for questions.
Thank you so much, Britton. That's a lot, so we appreciate you dividing that all out so we could really understand the steps that the applicant's gone through. I believe the Craigs are on here. Would you all like to say anything or add any additional information to Britton's report?
Hi, this is Julie Craig. Yes, I just want to point out that despite the many two-story structures that are behind the small structures on corners, which I also presented in my conceptual letter of intent, or the concept one, whichever one. But anyway, there's a lot of buildings that are already exactly how we wanted to do it. But you said it was too tall, so then we went down to a 1-story. So we've got 2 bedrooms in there and a single car garage. And we brought it all down to how we thought was going to be reasonable, because we still want a garage. I don't want a carport. I think they look ugly. I want a garage. We also are looking at buying an electric car, and you can't really have an electric car if you don't have a place to plug it in. So that's another piece. The other thing is the Firths, who are the only 2 letters of opposition. It's funny that they would be it, because they have a 3,500 square foot home with a 2-car garage that sits right on their back lot line and right on the street. They don't even have a driveway. So I think that's odd that they would be so vocal about that. I also thought I sent you 5 different neighbors that were in favor, Britton, not just 4. So we just wanted to make this house a little more grand, and we need bedrooms. I need a laundry room, and we need bathrooms. So instead of a 2-bedroom, 1-bath house, we will have a comfortable house to have Thanksgiving, Christmas, whatever.
Thank you, Julie, for making those comments. We appreciate it. Okay, at this point, commissioners, if you have any questions for Britton or for the Craigs, now is the time.
Britton, could I ask to see the Laurel Street elevation again? I'd like to understand how the garage relates to the facade of the house.
There were 2 options presented. So there was option B that has the gable roof end facing the street, and then there was option A. And so the renderings are kind of the most complete picture. We do have elevations as well, but let me know what slide you want to be on.
Let me see a site plan. So on the Laurel Street side, that garage sits prominent of the house, closer to the Laurel Street.
It would be closer to the property line and the street curb than the existing house. Yes, ma'am.
But let me also point out that it's almost 21 feet from the edge of the house, or the edge of the garage, to the street. We have a huge setback. I guess it's called a setback from the street to my property line is more than 15 feet.
Would there be
Go ahead.
Would there be a reason why that garage could not be set back to be even with the house, or?
Yes, so it's a little bit, it's not as bold of a line on this site plan. but if you will look right above that blue rectangle, there's kind of a lightly indicated rectangle. It's got a couple of dimensions on it, and the sideways text says 2-story rock siding building. That is the 2-story historic structure. It's on our historic resources survey that is existing. So it's not very feasible to move this garage back because there's already a building that would prevent that from happening. And so even to kind of reduce the depth of this structure, you wouldn't be able to reduce it too much because you wouldn't have sufficient room for it to serve as a garage. So it is a little bit limited in what it can do. And so when staff evaluated that existing condition, we did note that the setback itself would kind of sufficiently meet the approval criteria. So there is a very limiting site condition on where this garage can go.
Yeah, and we're trying desperately to save that 2-story structure, that accessory structure. Right now, I've been told by 2 different people, 2 different structural engineers, that one, it needs to come down, which I'm violently opposed to. I want them to figure out how we can save it. And the other guy has figured out how we can build a pole barn with inside of that structure to hopefully save it. I don't want to take down that stone building.
So, Britton, do I understand right then that staff is not opposed to where the garage sits, but you're opposed to the height? Is that right?
That's correct. And so what we are looking at is the need to make a complete recommendation to the commissioners because there is needed a decision tonight. And so staff certainly doesn't oppose the location or the setting of the structure, the footprint, because we understand the limiting conditions that are there on this site. And that's just typical of Old Town. It's not all the same. And there are some conditions that we have some challenges making things fit well with old structures and new rules. And so the setback modification for staff was really not at issue. It was the overall height. And so this is still proposed to be a 2-story height structure. Even though there is not a second floor proposed anymore, it did remove the issue of the floor to area ratio modification from being needed, but it's still proposed to be fairly tall and taller than the existing structure. So if you combine the closeness to the street compared to the existing main structure, and then the height taller, those things combined are why staff's recommendation was for disapproval. And that's just staff's evaluation based on the approval criteria. It's laid out in a fairly lengthy staff report, but also wanted to make sure that we showed that and conveyed that here.
Right. So I have a question for Ms. Craig. So Ms. Craig, if there is no second floor above the garage, why does the garage need to be this tall?
Well, I asked my builder and he said it's best to do that if you want attic space and to keep it cooler. So I said, fine, because it's a garage. Additionally, the house next door at 1204 is 24.5 feet tall, taller than my proposed garage, the current one. And also there are many other 2-story houses within 2 houses of me. So that really is shouldn't be an issue because there's already other 2 stories and multifamily houses around me.
Carolee, did that answer your question?
Well, it does. I would say that rendering kind of does a disservice then. It doesn't show what's next door. Do we have anything, Britton, that shows us what the context is?
Page 187 of that agenda will show you the height of the house next door.
Thank you, Ms. Craig. She's going to it right now. Perfect.
There's also another one, Britton, that I showed where all the multifamily and the 2 stories were. Unfortunately, on just one computer, so I don't know.
That's 13th Street. Do we have Laurel Street? That's the one that I think we're, okay, well, okay.
Well, it's the front of the house that the biggest from what I gather from reading everything, it's the facade, the front facade of the house that's the most important. Yes, it's taller than my house next door on Laurel. That's a 1-story home, but the one across the street is a 2-story. So I don't really get the whole, it's too tall for the neighborhood, because it's not.
So it's Catherine Morales, and I'm going to more or less agree with what Carol Lee is saying. And I think that the issue is its mass compared to your house. So whether or not there are other 2-story buildings in the neighborhood is not the point, I think, here. The point here is, especially when you look at either view A or B, Britton, either one of them, it just looks massive compared to the house itself. And I think that is more the issue that we're talking about, not the comparison to a 2-story house that is next door. Am I correct?
Britton, what are your thoughts on that?
So one of the things that we want to make sure we do is evaluate the context of what's being requested. And so there are certainly taller structures surrounding. There are certainly 2-story structures. The 13th Street view, staff has no concern about because this is set far back from that front facade. And that front facade is our primary goal, is to protect that and to keep that as the prominent facade. In this instance, Laurel Street is a busier street than East 13th Street is. It's a kind of a wider streetscape. And so the impact is mostly going to be on that Laurel Street facade. And again, because of it's not the setback, it's not where it's located compared to that street curb. It's really the overall height that is kind of really leading to staff's conclusion.
Thank you, Britt.
If I can point out that page 153 through 155 in the agenda will show you other homes that are just like ours that have actual 2-story additions behind their little connector spot, connector porch, or whatever you want to call it. But so we took it down from the 2-story to a 1-story because that's what you wanted us to do. And now I'm a little baffled because it still sounds like you're not happy.
It's still fairly tall for a 1-story. I mean, it is significantly taller.
The house is 18 feet. The accessory building is 20 feet, and this is 22 feet. So it's not significantly taller.
Excuse me, Chair. This is Sophia Nelson here, the Planning Director. Please excuse me for interrupting. I just wanted to remind the Commission and our applicant that during deliberations of the Commission, that they may be able to respond to your questions should you ask them to, but it's not a back and forth discussion. Please forgive me for interrupting. I just wanted to state that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Clarifying, Sophia. Okay, commissioners, what other questions might we have for the applicant?
Faustine, this is Michael here. I'm looking at slide 30, I believe, in the deck that you're showing, or Britton is showing. If you, bear with me just for a second, I want to go through these bullets. So the first one is the screen porch. I have no issue with. Addition of a porch, patio, deck, fine. The next one, I think is fine. So then on the fourth one, right? So we're talking about, it's just generally stating we want to add a garage. Okay. Let me jump ahead. So I'm looking at the, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bullet. It was 2.6 or 2 feet 6 inches. Now it's 1 foot. The next one down was 3 feet. Now it's 1 foot and 3 inches. And then in that same one, it says 16 feet, or it was 18, now it's 16. So my question to Britton, if this were below, and I hope I'm saying this right, if we were to lower the height of the addition by 1 foot, let's say 1 foot 1 inch on that, one bullet and then 1 foot 4 inches on the other bullet, would it be in compliance?
From a building height standpoint, yes. From a style and character standpoint, I think adjustments can still be made. And the reason is the proposed roof pitch is steeper than that low sloped Craftsman roof. So Craftsman roofs tended to be a low roof slope, a 3 and 12 or a 4 and 12 slope. Whereas on a Victorian, you might see more of a 6 and 12 or an 8 and 12, something much steeper. This being a steeper roof creates a condition in which the roof height overall is taller than had it been a lower slope. A lower slope roof would also be more compatible with the character of that Craftsman style home, and also that 2-story accessory structure.
Yes.
And so it's not just the building height itself kind of coming down a foot or so to be compliant with the building height modification. There is the roof slope, which is creating the tall roof height, which is also not as compatible with the character as a lower slope roof might be.
Okay, but there's not a bullet on here that mentions slope.
That's correct, because this is the caption, and so there's nothing in the UDC that gets into roof slopes kind of as a bullet item that we do when we provide notification. So the notification that goes out for this item is the same that you see on the captions that we provide for consistency. That way people can identify what's being requested and know that the item is what they were interested in hearing.
Okay, I guess you just confused me. So that's
apologies. It is captured in the staff report, but that report was very long.
Okay. I mean, ultimately what I'm getting at, just listening to the conversation and remembering the prior conversation, you've struck through some of these, great. The floor to area ratio, which I think was the biggest one, has been resolved. I'm just wondering, hearing what we've heard here tonight, right? It's about cooling and attic space. I'm thinking 1 foot, 1 foot 1 inch lower, 1 foot 4 inches lower. Would we resolve those two? I personally do not have an issue whatsoever with the location of it. I have no issue with the porch, with the windows, the doors, all of those parts of this. But I agree with the comments that were made about just what I am thinking of is none of the other houses anywhere else in Old Town. It's just the relationship of this addition to the existing house. And I understand what their goals are, what they want to do, and I'm trying to figure out how do we get to compliance, complies versus partially complies. And the slope part, I get it, but maybe I'm missing something. I don't know.
Again, I'd like to point out pages 153 through 150.
Michael, did you have a question for the applicant?
Well, I was going to ask, is there a way to, and maybe this, given also what I've heard Britton say, we have to get to a decision here. So maybe it's a conditional type approval that says, do this, but lower the height by 1 foot and 1 inch, or 1 foot and 4 inches.
So I guess maybe, Ms. Craig, are you all open to lowering the roof more?
I am open to anything you guys can tell me that you want. I thought I did it. So anything will be helpful. It's kind of complicated because I keep throwing money at 3D rendering people to draw this, and I throw money at the builder, draw this, and I still am not fully getting compliant. So yes, I'll do whatever you tell me. That's why I offered you A or B. I thought maybe that's what you want.
Faustine,
Yes, ma'am.
may I offer
Please.
that I would be prepared tonight to approve everything but the garage. And back to an earlier comment, that was made. The garage, it's as much about compatibility to the house. And this goes to Michael's point. It's not just the height of that roof. If they're not trying to get 2 stories out of it, it's not just about the height, but it is about the slope. And I'm sorry that that wasn't a more specific comment, because that would make it more compatible with the house. And I think that might be something that's bothering all of us when we look at this, is that we're recognizing that for some reason it's not compatible, and we're trying to figure out why. And it is about that slope. If you look at that elevation, that is a much higher slope than what the house is, which makes it jars the eye. So, you know, it does make it taller because the slope is different, and the slope would, if the slope were to go down, it would be lower. So it's more about compatibility of appearance of these 2 buildings side by side on the same site. At least that is what it is for my eye.
Thank you so much for that comment.
Yes, thank you. Well said.
Okay, are there any other questions or comments that the commissioners would like to make right now before we go to a public hearing? Okay, with that, we will move to open the discussion for a public hearing. Nat, Myrna, are there any people in the meeting that would like to speak on behalf of the project or towards the project?
I don't see anybody in the chat space or the question and answer space, and I have not received any requests. I don't believe Myrna has either.
Okay.
Nope.
Okay, very good. Well, we will close the public hearing then and move on to allow staff and applicant any final comments, and then I'll move to request a motion. Okay, I'd like to request a motion.
Could we see the recommended? Yeah, let's go back to. Oh my. I'd like to approve everything except the garage addition. So do you want to help me out with that, Britton?
That is consistent with staff's recommendation. And so what you can do in your motion is to essentially say that. And so the reason that there's so much detail in this is because there are separate pieces for the garage addition, the setback encroachment, and the building height modifications. We wanted to make sure that it was clear that staff's recommendation of denial included all of the things that would go with the garage addition. But we are recommending approval of all of the other components for the front and the west side of the house, which is the changes to the porches, the setback modification for the front porch expansion, and the changing out of the door for the windows, the wider front door, and the screened porch windows.
Okay, I make the motion that we accept the staff recommendation of approval.
Thank you, Carolee. Is there a second for that motion?
I'll second it. It's Catherine Morales.
Thank you, Catherine. Okay, I have a first by Carolee, a second by Catherine, and to follow the recommendation of staff for this project. Myrna, if you would, is there any further discussion before we move forward? Okay, great. Myrna, if you will call for the vote.
I'm sorry, Faustine, actually.
Oh yeah, sure.
Can I just ask?
Michael, question.
For Britton or Sophia, like, what happens next? What options does the applicant have?
So following Harc's decision, staff captures that in a memo, a certificate of appropriateness memo. And so if the commissioners were to move forward with the motion that's been made and seconded, then it would be in writing and provided to the applicant. Anytime there is a denial of either the whole project or part of a project, the applicant is provided with information about their options for an appeal, what the timeline for that submission of an appeal request is, and what the procedures are. And so if the applicant chooses not to appeal, then that's the final decision. And if the applicant does choose to appeal, staff works with the applicant to get them scheduled for the next available city council meeting and go through that procedure accordingly.
If they choose not to appeal and come back with a new design for the garage as a new COA request?
Yes, that would certainly be possible. And so for this particular certificate of appropriateness, Harc is making a final decision in this instance. But if the applicant wanted to come back with a new design or a different design, they would certainly have the opportunity to do that with a new certificate of appropriateness.
Immediately, or is there a delay?
There is only a delay if the applicant is requesting the exact same request. If there is a different request being presented, they can come back as soon as they're ready to do so.
Thank you.
Okay, any other comments before we move for a vote? Okay, Myrna, if you will please call for that vote.
Mr. Johnson, do you have a question, sir? I'm sorry, I see it. It looks like you're muted and you've tried to ask a question of the chair. Sorry, Mr. Johnson, we didn't hear you.
I'm sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
I'm just asking that we go ahead and vote. I'm using the term calling the question, asking that we go ahead and vote.
Yes, sir. The chair has called for the vote, and Myrna is taking the roll.
Carolee Nunn,
Yes.
Michael Walton,
Yes.
Faustine Curry,
Yes.
Steve Johnston,
Yes.
Carrie Hyde,
Yes.
Catherine Morales.
Yes.
Okay, thank you
And
very
so that
much.
motion passes 6-0.
Thank you, Myrna. Okay, and thank you, Ms. Craig, for bringing that forward. And Britton, I'm sure you will make sure that they know all of their next steps should they like to go to council or however they'd like to approach.
Absolutely, Madam Chair.
Thanks, great. Thank you all for the discussion. I know that was a lot. We've looked at that project a number of times, but I sure appreciate all your input. It makes all the difference. Okay, we'll move right on to our last item, which is item F, discussion of the downtown and old town design guidelines, updated changes with feedback from us. So Britton, are the design guidelines, do you have some comments on those?
I do. Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And so what we did in the last meeting, commissioners, is share with you the updates to the design guidelines. We're coming back with this last item of the evening just to try to get any feedback that y'all might have, because we are going to return comments to our consultant and have them prepare the final draft. The next step in the process would be adoption. So we want to make sure if y'all do have any comments or any feedback that we capture that. This is not at all the last opportunity to do so. We just want to make sure we get the bulk of the edits to our consultant early next week so that we can continue on in this process and we can complete the project this summer. And so what I'm going to do is just do a quick recap of those proposed changes, ask for your feedback, and then share those next steps. And so the big thing that we're changing is we're reorganizing to go from 14 chapters down to 5. So rather than having items on architectural details and site design and canopies and signs and area 1 and area 2 of downtown and old town, rather than have those spread across 14 chapters, we've condensed down to 5. And so if your project is in area 1, you go to chapter 1. If it's in old town, you go to chapter 3. If you're just doing signage, you go to chapter 5. Much easier to navigate. And that was in response to our stakeholder feedback saying, hey, it's just really hard for us to get where we need to go. There was some feedback already on this table of contents, and being sure that the colors for the text were distinct enough from the background to be easier to read. So please know that just because I'm showing this, I did not miss that comment. That has been noted. We also provided new content. So our consultant has drawn up these illustrations and put together these photos of our architectural styles. So rather than just a generalized, here's what architectural styles there are, we have the styles that are specific to our historic districts with all of the characteristics that you would expect to see. Where this is really going to help us commissioners is when we consider additions to structures, historic structures, we'll be able to see what those key characteristics are and evaluate additions and alterations to those structures according to its style and not just as a general concept. And so we think that'll be a good improvement, because what is really great for one style might not be as successful for another style. And this will just also really help our vocabulary and being able to share with applicants what style of house they have and what characteristics would help with compatibility. We have some new requirements for the downtown, but we also are keeping a lot of the requirements we already have. We've got great information on what it looks like to protect and preserve historic character, but where we needed some additional guidance is for infill building design. We do get requests throughout the year for new construction in our downtown, and making sure it's compatible with our existing historic fabric was something that y'all emphasized, and our stakeholder meetings, our focus groups also emphasized the importance of compatibility. So we're specifically addressing kind of how the buildings are organized. We're specifically addressing materials. That was a big request. And then talking about upper floor window proportions and things that these are things that we've used previously in our evaluations. We're just trying to make more clear here about those expectations. So a lot of that would be focused in area 1. Area 2, a lot of the feedback that we heard from y'all and from our stakeholders is we need to pay careful attention and have careful treatment of the transition zones, the areas in which commercial development is right up against residential development. And so the solution our consultant has proposed is to kind of identify 2 separate categories of streetscape. One, an urban commercial, which is what one would expect for buildings built specifically for commercial uses. They tend to have parking areas, or they may be located with the building entrance right on the sidewalk. They're usually built to the property lines and might have no setbacks, especially for the front. Whereas our residential character, you have those setbacks from the front property line and the side property lines. The buildings are distinct from each other rather than very close together or touching. And so making a distinction between those 2 character areas and giving guidance accordingly is a way that we can manage infill construction in area 2, specifically in our transition zones, which have been a topic of much discussion. For residential infill and additions, we're keeping some of the guidelines that we already have. So additions consistent with the Secretary of the Interior standards, laying out those provisions, prohibiting vinyl and aluminum siding, things that are not quite compatible with the historic character. Infill construction for our Old Town is something we don't have a lot of guidance for, because these design guidelines were set up at a time that did not require Harc review. Now it does. And so now that we have Harc reviewing infill, we need that content. So we're giving that guidance on, I said additions according to architectural style, but for new stuff, addressing concerns about looming or getting too close or overbearing on neighboring structures, what materials are good to use, the window styles, having porches on many architectural styles. Porches are kind of key characteristics for a lot of our area. It's important to say not all a ranch style house may not be very porch oriented. So there will be some exceptions for that. But overall, the infill we're seeing, it really lends itself well to including porches. And then also some better guidance for fence design, including materials and height. You do see fences when there's a height exception or materials exception requested, but we only have one design guideline for that. So we're providing some additional guidance there. The changes to the demolition and relocation, they're getting their own chapter. It's not going to change the UDC approval criteria. So applicants will still need to make their case that they meet the approval criteria, which is either loss of significance, economic hardship or that there's kind of a compelling public purpose for the demolition. But what we do want to do is give guidance on when Harc makes approval with conditions. There are salvage options, there are archive options, just wanting to be more clear on when to use those tools and opportunities that are laid out in the UDC. So the UDC has some language, but we're adding a little bit more clarification on what those expectations are and when to use that. Signs, we're also keeping a lot of what we currently have. So not changing any of the size limits based on the building facade length. So we have a lot of areas in which size sign, of course I said that backward, sign sizes are prescribed in our design guidelines. We are clarifying that only one primary sign is allowed per business per building, even on corner buildings. We are proposing that the total number of signs per business would be limited to 3. Right now, that's not clear. Right now, it talks about having 5 different types of signs available, which seems to kind of lend itself to the notion that you could have multiple kinds of signs on a single building and business. Giving more guidance on illumination styles, we see a lot of new illumination types being proposed, and we want to make sure we're successfully addressing that. And then also giving some guidance on signs for upper floor businesses. In this downtown, especially on the square, we have a first floor business and a second floor business. And sometimes coordinating that signage can be a challenge. And so where does that second floor tenant signage go when you have a building facade that's very ornamental and you don't want to destroy or disrupt architectural features to place that signage? And so what we're looking for, commissioners, and big thanks to Commissioners Morales and Asendorf Hyde for giving us feedback in writing already. Thank you so much for those comments and the hard work that you did, especially Commissioner Morales put a lot of time into giving feedback and edits on the design guidelines. But we just wanted to check in and say, do the proposed changes give you the tools that you need for decision making? Are there any proposed changes that you saw that you'd like to remove or edit? And are there any changes that we need to add? And so just trying to make sure if we're headed in the right direction, we're very glad about that. If there's something that you see a need to adjust, we'd love to take that feedback. Or if you need a little bit of time to consider it, please let us know in the next few days what we can do to make sure we're capturing that correctly.
Thank you so much, Britton. It has been a monumental task, I know. We're so grateful for all the work you guys are doing on it. What comments do you have for Britton? Or yes, Pam, if you need more time to review, that's great. Just make sure you get them to Britton whenever you have a few minutes.
When is, I know the optimal time for delivering comments was probably yesterday. And I don't want to talk about the drop dead, so you're at the last possible minute, but what would be the next best time due date for this?
That's okay. So I have kind of major, and that leads me kind of into the next phase. So we've got some stuff on stakeholder engagement, but we are closing our public comment period. And I say closing is in capturing this batch of comments and feedback tomorrow on the 14th. I will meet with the Main Street Advisory Board in their regular meeting tomorrow morning, share this update with them. And tomorrow we're trying to make sure we've got everything accounted for. I owe the bulk of the comments to our design guidelines consultant on Monday. It'll be end of day before that gets done. And then we're going to the City Council workshop on May 25th to share the update with council and get their direction and feedback on that. And so following that workshop on the 25th, we want to try to have the edits to our consultants so that they can prepare that final document. Our timeline goal is to come back to y'all for a recommendation on adoption in your second meeting in June, so that the City Council can consider it in both of their meetings in July. This is going to be an ordinance and requires 2 readings. And so we're anticipating having that scheduled for both council meetings in July to do a first and second reading and a public hearing on this. So ideally, I would be able to collect everything by the 25th to share that kind of last feedback to our consultant. Earlier is always better, but that's kind of the real target date where we're anticipating that last big round of feedback to be delivered to Post Oak.
Thank you, Britton. So Pam, you have a little bit of time. Yes, Michael, what thoughts do you have for Britton and staff?
Well, I'm with Pam. I would absolutely want to give feedback. My request is, can I have these slides?
Absolutely.
Britton, can you just email that out to all the commissioners so they have them?
Yes, we can absolutely do that.
Perfect.
I will commit to you to have something before Monday. And I will refrain from nitpicky stuff.
Nitpicky is just fine. That's also an option. Please do know that staff is very busy being nitpicky. And if you have any guidelines that give you real pause, or if you have something that you see, hey, I think you guys missed this, please know that that bigger picture feedback is also what we're looking for. We don't need everybody to be really nitpicky and looking for the punctuation. We have a lot of people working on that. But we do want to make sure that, especially with the proposed changes, we're not missing something that y'all would find important to your work, or that you're not seeing something that really gives you pause. So we're available to meet with you, discuss that with you if that's helpful. This is a big project and it's a lot of pages. So please don't feel concerned if you feel a bit behind. We do want to do this project promptly, but it does put a little bit of time pressure on everybody, as deadlines always do.
And I commit to the same. I'll get you feedback by Monday morning.
That would be really excellent. Thank you.
Britton, your kindness is, so we're all grateful for your kindness. Okay, any other comments or thoughts? And like myself, if you haven't done it, make sure and get them to Britton as soon as you can. Okay, with that, our last item is to adjourn. And so that's great news. Before we do, I just want to again tell you guys how awesome you were tonight. It's so much better when there's so many comments. So thank you. So with that, I think we'll take a motion to adjourn in a second, and then we're good. So I call for a motion to adjourn.
A motion, we adjourn.
Thank you. I wasn't sure anyone wanted to leave. Michael is the first and a second on that.
I'll second, Terry.
Thank you, Terry. Myrna, do we need to vote on that? Are we good?
I'll just go through it real quick. Carolee Nunn,
Yes.
Michael Walton,
Yes.
Justine Curry,
Yes.
Steve Johnston,
Yes.
Terry Hyde,
Yes.
Catherine Morales.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Myrna. You guys are awesome. We'll
Okay.
see you next time.
Thanks. Bye.
Well done, Faustine.
Yeah, good job.
Okay.